All right, welcome back. I want to review for a second my statement about social systems. So broadly, I wasn't I was talking about healthcare when I was saying is the U.S. healthcare system a system or not a system? And I said there's two ways to kind of think about systems. I want to say that these metaphors of like a clock or a watch and like a school of fish right aren't just this metaphor does not just apply to healthcare as a social system. It applies to any social system. Okay, so we could think of so I know a bunch of you are nutritionists or nutritionists in waiting, and so you could think about the food supply, right? That's a good example of a social system. How does the food get from the producers, so the farmers in Idaho that are growing your potatoes, the ranchers in California that are growing your raisins, the coffee growers in Guatemala, right? How does all that get to Hannaford down in, on 7 Mill Road, right? So that's an example of a social system, right? And the food supply, there is no, so again, like the point of your book is the US healthcare system isn't a system, nor is the food supply, if you think about it, nor is the telecom services that provide your lifeline, right? My lifeline, that, nor is a whole slew of things, right? So when you think about as you go through your career, whether you are, a food scientist, or you are a social scientist, right? More like me, right? As you think about systems, there are clock-like components to every system. So the food system, right? The food supply system does have clock-like components to it. A ranch has more of a clock-like components to it. The rancher is making decisions, organizing his or her production process in a more clock-like way. But the actual flow of food through our food supply is much more like fish, right? Because a rancher could decide, a person who owns a ranch in California, for example, could grow grapes. That's where raisins come from, by the way. Right? So where that's a penalty of sitting in the front. So a rancher could decide, I want to grow grapes, right? Or the rancher could decide, I want to grow almonds because a whole bunch of people have decided they like almond milk. Right? And so it's really hard to milk those little almonds to get the milk out of them. Anyway, probably have seen the little cute video where people are like milking the almonds. It's a joke. But you could, the rancher is making those decisions. How is he or she making those decisions? Well, first of all, those are examples of crops that take a long time to get going, right? You have to grow grapes, you have to grow grapevines. It takes years to get grapevines up to productive capacity. Same with almonds. But what's really simple is, like, say you have a farm in Texas where you could grow soybeans or wheat. That's something you could decide year to year to year. What am I going to plant this year? Wheat, soybeans. How do I make that decision? If you were a rancher in Texas and you had to make a decision about what you're going to grow this year, what's going to drive your decision? Trust me, this actually has a point to health systems, right? If you're a rancher sitting down in Texas, right? My wife's family is from or my wife's mother, my mother-in-law is from a town called Port Lavaca, which is relatively close to Corpus Christi. And a bunch of her family were farmers, and they had to make this decision every year. And it wasn't necessarily soybeans versus wheat, but it could be a variety of different things. Different places in the country have it's easier to grow particular crops, right? You're not going to grow oranges in New Hampshire, and you're not going to make maple syrup in Florida, right? But within, even if you're in New Hampshire, you've got a range of choices. You could grow blueberries, you could grow, you can focus on whatever, you got a bunch of choices. Let's say you're a rancher and you're thinking about, what should I grow this year? Are you thinking about, how are you going to make that call? What's going to motivate you to make a choice? Yeah, go ahead. Okay, who else is growing what, and why is that relevant? Something else? Why would you do something? So the answer was, well, you should pay attention to who else is doing what, because if everybody else is growing, say, wheat, you might want to do soybeans. Why might you want to do soybeans if everybody else is doing wheat? Yes, ma'am. Less competition. Okay. And what's the implication there? You'll get more money, right? If everybody's growing wheat, you're like, well, you know what? Everybody else growing wheat, I'm going to grow soybeans. I'll make more money. I'll go into the soybean market. So what we've just kind of explored is some very basic economics of supply and demand, right? If you can anticipate, and that's what actors in the market are constantly doing. Farmers, farmers in Port Lavaca, Texas, and in Boise, Idaho, and and up in, Farmington, Maine, are all making decisions like that year to year to year to year. Now you've got some crops, like I mentioned, I kind of joked and picked raisins, which is a bad example to start with, because those are long decision trees. You gotta, so those guys and gals have to make really hard calls, because they're not making calls about this year. They're making calls about 10, 15, 20 years. You're making real gambles there, right? Making big investments. Well, that's not unlike, and this is where I start to draw back in. That's not unlike, maybe some of you have an interest in going to medical school. Well, that's a really long road, and we'll talk about that, right? We'll talk about that. That's a really long road, especially if, let's say, you want to be a hand surgeon, right? So if you want to be a hand surgeon, that's an orthopedic surgeon. So if you want to be a hand surgeon, you have to graduate undergrad, 4 years. You have to go to medical school, 4 years. That's 8 years. You want to get a orthopedic surgery residency, 5 years. So now we're to 4, that's 8, 5, 13. Hand surgeon, 2-year fellowship, that's 2 more years. Now we're at 15 years, right? So people nodding around, they're shaking their heads. I can see who's thinking about medical school, right? So we're talking about 15 years. So at that point, you are 18 plus 15, 28, 33, right? So you get your first grown-up job at 33. It's okay. It's once you get there, you can make boatloads of money. Orthopedic surgeons make like $800,000 a year. So, but the problem you face potentially is, what if in that 15-year period, something about surgery changes? Which it did, by the way. It does periodically in healthcare, changes all the time, in the United States especially. That's one of the beauties of the United States, is things like that change all the time, because it isn't just you going through the system. There's a whole bunch of other people in the system. Remember, we talked about how many millions of people 16 million people are involved in the delivery of healthcare in the United States. And they're all thinking about, how can I make a profit off this? Now, they're also thinking, for the most part, remember I said, healthcare is beautiful because you can do well by doing good. Most people who are involved in healthcare have good intentions, right? They go into it with the idea that I want to be a helper. I want to help people be better. And I know all of you who are, nutrition and OT and all that stuff, great people. You're all great people. You have good intentions. You're not going into that necessarily thinking, as an OT, I'm going to make $1 bazillion a year. Sorry, you're not. But you'll make a good living. But there are lots of people thinking about and responding to incentives, prices, what we talked about a minute ago, right? Using the simple example of the farmer making the decision about what crops to plant this year, is also happening in every other industry everywhere all the time. And the longer you have to make an investment for, the harder you need to think about the future. So for example, my father is a retired pathologist. That's a person, that's a doctor. We'll talk about the different kinds of doctors, but that's a kind of doctor that runs the laboratory. So they're really, it's laboratory medicine. So he's a physician, goes to medical school, does his residency. He runs the laboratory. So he does all the, every time you go and pee in a cup or get your blood drawn, that stuff is flowing through the hospital laboratory. There's a physician sitting over there, a pathologist who's overall in charge. Now there's a bunch of people working. It's a big operation. There's a bunch of people working there. He's got general oversight. If you go in and if you get a lumpectomy because you get a mammogram and it looks like you've got a lump in your breast, and you get referred to a surgeon to have that lump removed and then looked at, right? The person who looks at that is it's called gross pathology, and that's your pathologist. Your pathologist, then the pathologist sitting down in the laboratory, somebody who you probably never meet, takes a sample of the tissue that the surgeon pulled out, puts it under a microscope and says, you have cancer or not, right? And so that's what they do. So my father, at the time that he chose pathology, was weighing between pathology and radiology. And he decided he was a biochemistry undergrad, so he decided to go. He was really into lab stuff, so he decided he wanted to do pathology. As it turns out, pathologists make okay money, right? They make, and okay money for a physician is like $300,000 a year, right? So he made okay money. As it turns out, radiology had a bunch of breakthroughs in the time that he was working as a pathologist, and radiology became much more valuable, much more accurate. MRIs became commonplace, right? There's a whole bunch of advances that radiologists could do that they couldn't do when he chose to go into training. And had he gone to radiology, he probably would have made 2 or 3 times as much money over the course of his career as he did as a pathologist. And not only that, pathologists, hospitals started outsourcing a lot of their lab work, so the pathology field started shrinking, right? So my point is, had he known what would happen in the future, he would have made different plans. He probably would have gone into radiology because, like I said, he was kind of weighing the two, and he eventually kind of tilted towards pathology because he liked laboratory medicine. He had a good career. I'm not saying, like, he lived okay, but he does kind of sometimes should have gone into radiology. You don't know those things, right? And so you make the best calls you can. The thing is that you as an individual making the decision about your future careers, whether it's going to be into medicine or whatever it is you're doing, right? You're kind of looking into the future and imagining, what does my future look like if I pursue this particular degree, right? You made a choice to come to UNH, you made a choice for your major. Maybe you haven't made a choice for your major, some of you are freshmen. So maybe you're thinking about, as you think about, what do I want to do, right? You're making assumptions that you're projecting from here into the future. No one can actually see the future. No one can actually see the future. And so when we imagine that the future is like it is like today, we are kind of taking on a more clockwork kind of imagination of what the future looks like, right? We can accurately project what the future looks like. The future, in fact, in my mind, in most industries, looks more like this, where you have lots of people making decisions, and that changes the fundamental environment as you go forward. So like I said, my dad had no idea. When he looked at both, they made about the same amount of money at the time he picked, right? And then radiology shot to the moon and pathology started kind of falling off. And that happened because there were lots of people around doing things like discovering MRIs, and well, not discovering it, but finding ways to make MRI machines less expensive. And so the world changes in unpredictable ways that are unknowable. So I want to make that point both generically for your own kind of thinking as citizens, but also as as we think about healthcare, how much of the future is knowable, and if it isn't knowable, how do we want to structure our health system, right? Do we want it to be agile and able to absorb change rapidly, integrate change rapidly, or do we want it to be, or do we want to have strong controls on it, which less agile, but maybe we can optimize more, so we can make it more efficient. But the problem with that is when you pursue more efficiency, you become less agile, right? Like it's kind of, there's a trade-off there, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So there's a trade-off whenever you make those decisions. So the European Union, to make this a clear point, the European Union knew that Pfizer and Moderna and J&J were all working on immunizations, and they dittered around and negotiated, trying to get the best price out of Pfizer and Moderna and J&J, and I forget the other one that kind of petered out. And the U.S. government said, "F it, just give us. We'll pay whatever you tell us. We'll pay, and we'll take it, and we'll take 1 billion doses, right?" So who got the billion doses? The U.S. did. That's me. I'm the U.S. Right? And Europe was 3 months, 4 months down the line because Pfizer prioritized J&J, Pfizer, Moderna said, "We already signed. Sorry, Germany. We already signed contracts with the U.S. and we can only make so much." So the question is, so there are different approaches to healthcare, as there are in every industry. So I want you to kind of think about that. When you think about systems, human systems, social systems, I want you to kind of keep those two things in mind, right? Within a larger system that looks like this, right? The market really looks like this. At the macro level, there is no way to turn the entire economy into a wall. It doesn't work, right? But within this kind of macro system of fishiness, right, where everybody's kind of doing their own thing, there are individuals and corporations that operate more like clocks. They are setting decisions, optimizing, trying to figure out, but they're also projecting for the future. So all of you making your decisions about what you're going to pursue in the future are like little fish looking for a littler fish to eat, right? You're swimming around looking for the next best thing that's going to best service you. Not to minimize this, but we're going to talk a lot about money and the fact that money really does make the world go around in important ways. All right, so that was, I just kind of wanted to, felt like I hadn't given that enough. So no industry in the United States is truly centralized. You can't think in the sense of what a system would be based on what our book says. You can't look at the food industry, food supply, auto manufacturing, energy, technology, housing, clothing. You run down the list. Nobody operates like that. Now, I can tell you where it did operate like that. It operated like that in the Soviet Union. Soviet Union used to do things like that. They centrally controlled, tried to treat the economy like a clock. And their people suffered for it. So a classic example of Soviet direction of the economy . It's not going to work well. Hold on, I just got to make one little tweak here. try to repeat my slide. So what was I saying? So there are no Soviet Union. Yes, that's what it was. Soviet Union would try to organize their economy like a clock, right? And so the central government would send out directives to each industry to tell them, this is how much we want you to produce. And so they would say, to say the nail industry, we want you to produce X number of tons of nails. They would tell the shoe industry, we want you to produce 10 million pairs of shoes. What did the people working in the system do? Well, they targeted, they were very specific. They're somewhat like if you know like the stories of like the genie, you ask a genie, he gives you 3 wishes and you ask the genie for a wish and you're like, I wish I was, would live forever or something like that. And you imply, and you don't mention, oh, and I want to stay 22 forever. And so you live forever, but you become gradually like more and more of like a cricket, or something like that, right? So in the Soviet Union, producers would be like, okay, you want 10 million pairs of shoes? Let me see, what's the cheapest way to make 10 million pairs of shoes? What size shoe do you wear? Size, yeah, a 13. So I'm going to tell you that you would have been seriously out of luck in the Soviet Union. Why would that be? They've got to make 10, the directions they have is make 10 million pairs of shoes. Smaller shoes are cheaper. So they made a whole boatload of really small shoes because that uses less material. It's cheaper. It makes them look good because they hit their targets. They made the 10 million shoes, but they all made size 5 shoes or 4 shoes. So you ladies probably okay. You, my friend, would be waiting in a very long line, right, for the 500 pairs of size 13 shoes that they got made. Okay, so that's the kind of response. Nails, make so many tons of nails. Okay, we'll make tons of nails. You know how it would be really easy to make a whole bunch of tons of nails? Are they going to make a variety of nails? No. What are they going to do? Make a bunch of really jumbo nails because that's super cheap and fast and, and basically useless. So that you get what you ask for. But the problem is if you try to direct an economy like that, it's kind of like trying to ask the genie for, for a wish, right? People optimize within a system, optimize for their own well-being. The managers were saying, you want 10 million shoes? No problem. I get bonuses if I make it with less cost. So I'm going to make small shoes because they're cheap to make and I can hit my target and I'll make it for less money. And then you have to give me a bonus, right? So those are things to keep in mind. Normally what happens in the United States, on the other hand, is any shoe company that makes only small shoes goes out of business, right? Any company that makes nails that tries to produce just big nails goes out of business because there just isn't that much demand. Somebody goes someplace else. So competition drives out that kind of nonsense in the US system. And that applies to healthcare as well. Health providers who are poor performers get driven out of business. Now that isn't always true, but on average it is. All right, so I want to hit one of the things. This is the iron triangle of healthcare. And it kind of applies to anything, but we'll talk about it here. And the iron triangle of healthcare is this: cost, quality, and access. If any of you guys were hoping to work in the IT field, just out of curiosity, you should think about it if you haven't yet. It's a really profitable industry. So you talk to IT people and you say, I need a project done. And they're like, do you want it good or do you want it quick? Because you can't have both, right? There's a trade-off between having an IT project done well or an IT project done fast, but you can't have both because the trade-off is if you want something fast, I'm going to have to take shortcuts. I'm going to have to kind of take some risk. But if you want it done well, I'm going to have to slow down, right? And so you can't have it as fast and cheap, right? So that's the other thing. So like healthcare, there's also the cheap, right? So you could have it, yeah. So you could have a project. Let's say you want to run servers throughout your hospital. We'll use a hospital as an example. We want to run new servers, run a new health information system. You can have it cheap, fast, and low quality. But if you want it fast and higher quality, it's going to cost you an awful lot of money, right? So healthcare is kind of the same way. So this is a thing we've been talking about. And I want to say this was kind of thought of in like the early 80s. This idea that we have this triangle in healthcare of cost, quality, and access, and it's constantly discussed. And so if you say this to any healthcare administrator, they're like, oh yeah, yep, iron triangle, cost, quality, access. So if we want, you can have really high quality healthcare, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to define what high quality healthcare is, right? But you probably have an idea what you think high quality is. Right? Accurate, actually fixes stuff that's wrong, you know, doesn't do wrong side surgery. Anybody know what wrong side surgery is? Heard of that? You've heard of it, right? What's wrong side surgery? Right. So you come in, you're like, we got to amputate the guy's right arm. There's something wrong, maybe. And so they amputate the left arm instead. We've got a cancer on the right kidney. Oops, we took out the left kidney. We took out the good kidney. We have testicular cancer. We've got to go in and take out the cancerous testicle. Oops, we took out the wrong one. Now you can't have kids, right? Happens more often than you would like to think, right? So that's a good example of quality, right? Is we actually do what we said we're going to do. Cost, obvious. U.S. healthcare system is very expensive. I mean, we're not joking around about that. And then access. So access is, how many of you guys have tried to get an appointment for anything with a physician and had to wait a long time? Yeah, right. So that's access, right? So access, what we'd like to have is quick access. We'd like to be able to get in quickly when there's a problem. We don't want to wait weeks or months for an MRI when our knee hurts, right? We want to get in as quickly as we can. We want it to be inexpensive, right? We don't want to spend thousands of dollars on an MRI. We'll pay a couple hundred, and then we want it to be a high quality. So if we go in for an MRI, we want to get a good picture. We want our orthopedic surgeon to be able to look at it and say, yes, I see the problem, it's right here, or I'm looking at your knee and it looks like there's no real serious damage, so we don't need to do surgery, right? On the other hand, a poor quality MRI might come out and it might look to this orthopedic surgeon like you do need surgery, and then they get in there and they do surgery on you and you didn't really need it. So that's, so it's, relatively speaking, easy to fix access. Let's say you want to, how many of you gone to the ED before, the emergency department? Yeah. And how long did you wait? Hours, right? Hours, right? Don't even try right now. It'd be like days. Don't even try right now. So how would you fix that? It's a super easy fix. What would you do? Lower the quality? Okay. How would you lower the quality? Give me an example. There you go. So we don't staff it we don't staff our ED. So this is a great example, actually. It wasn't the answer I was looking for, but it's a good one. You hire more physician extenders. That's a term that nurse practitioners and PAs hate. But that's what you would hire, is more nurse practitioners and PAs, right? Instead, or family medicine doctors instead of emergency department trained, emergency services trained physicians, right? So there's a whole residency for ED docs. They go through an ED residency where they learn all the emergency stuff, right? But if you go up to the North Country to Memorial Hospital up in North Conway, and you're up there skiing, right, in North Conway, up at, what is it, Attitash? Is that what's up there? What's up there? Yeah, Attitash. Looks like you go to Attitash and you fall down and go boom, break your leg. They bring you to Memorial. The doctor in the ED is likely not an ED physician. The doctor in the ED might not even be a doctor. The doctor in the ED might be a PA, because that's lower cost. It's hard to recruit ED trained physicians. They make boatloads of money. There's a huge amount of demand for them. And so a lot of the hospitals up in the North Country, you know, up Androscoggin up in Berlin, I'm friends with the CEO there. I'm friends with the CEO at Memorial. You know, these guys, you're not seeing an ED doc if you go to the ED at one of these places. And so that's one way to keep the cost down, because they would have to pay an ED physician even more than they would get paid if they were working at Wentworth Douglas, because even though it's beautiful to live up in God's country up there, most people don't want to live up there. And so they don't mind going up there for vacations, but they don't want to live in Berlin, New Hampshire year round. Anybody from Berlin? Not going to admit it now because I'm making fun of it, but it's a great place. I love going up to Berlin. I always, when I go to visit, we have resident interns, HMP interns go up to Berlin every year, and they get a fantastic experience. So future HMP students should think about it. Mike Peterson's the CEO, and he personally oversees the internship for the interns. So I love going up to visit the interns up there, because then I keep going up to Errol. Anybody from Errol? Anybody ever been to Errol? No, it's about an hour from the Canadian border, and there's a fantastic campground right on the Androscoggin River, and I go kayaking up there. It's beautiful. Anyway, the point being, your point is perfect, right? One thing we do is we start lowering the quality, right? In other words, we're hiring people at lower skill levels, less specific training to provide that care. Now, I'll tell you, they're good people, and they're not, but you're not getting an ED physician at a smaller hospital like that. Too expensive for them. So you can reduce the quality. How else can you speed up access in an ED? Well, what's holding everything up other than the administrators are just mean? What's holding up the process? There aren't enough doctors, right? You want to speed up how fast you get seen, you hire another doctor, right? Now, the problem with managing the ED is the flow of patients is not steady. Unlike, say, a family medicine operation or an outpatient, when you go to see your doctor, the doctor gets booked all day, every day, right? The ED, between the hours of 11 and 7 at night, is pretty quiet. Whatever shows up between 11 and 7 is usually really bad, but it's usually pretty quiet. So it could be that the ED doc from 11 to 7 is just sitting, drinking coffee with the nurses and smoking and joking, right? But, during that popular time of, kind of after the bars close and, we all start running around downtown and getting crazy, people fall down and go boom. And then, there's a whole bunch of demand. So you could stack up ED docs, but the problem is that the demand for ED service is kind of unpredictable. And so you could have ED docs sitting and waiting around. And so if you showed up at that time, you'd get seen like that. Or the demand all of a sudden everybody and their brother shows up at the ED and it just overwhelms. And that's where you get the hours and hours of wait. The problem is ED docs are really expensive. So if we want to fix access by speeding it up, by increasing the number of people, the number of providers, we could do that. So access gets better, quality gets better, but cost goes way up, right? So we've talked about, so that's how this works in healthcare. And this problem is really, really hard. right? It's not intractable. It's not impossible to try to fix, but it's really, really hard. The way that the Canadian health system, which is one of the more centralized health systems, works is their quality is good. You'll get seen by a doctor. The cost is excellent. They much lower cost per capita than we have. Their access, I'm going to use a technical term here, sucks, right? It sucks. And so if you live up on the Canadian border, what you see is a lot of Canadians come over the border and pay cash for care on the American side, because you can't do that in Canada, right? And so if you want an MRI in Canada, you might have to wait 6 months. So that means you're going to limp around your bad knee, not knowing what the hell has happened for 6 months while you're waiting to get seen, to get an MRI. And then you're going to wait another long time to see an orthopedic surgeon. And so that's the way they manage it. They've got low cost, good quality, but their access stinks, right? Another way that, say, the British healthcare system does this is they keep their costs down, their access is reasonable, but they'll control very tightly what you can get and what you can't get. So cancer care in Europe, much less aggressive than cancer care in the United States. And we'll talk a little bit about that, because there's there's a diminishing return to additional treatment in cancer. But our cancer care is much better than their cancer care. And so if you're a wealthy European, chances are you're coming over to Mass General to get your cancer care, right? If you're a wealthy British citizen, you'll do the same thing as you will probably do the same thing as the Canadians, which is you'll come to the United States. Most US hospitals do a real big ones, not like little, not AVH up in Berlin or Memorial up in North Conway, but big ones like Mass Gen and Brigham do a robust international business, especially from places like Canada, Britain, Germany, because their centralized systems, you'll come in and say, well, maybe you'll check Uncle Google for a treatment, and you'll come in and talk to your doctor about it. Like, well, I have this condition and I feel like I should get this medication. And they will tell you, well, this medication is old and it works pretty well, and that's what we prescribe. Now, the Americans, they've developed this other new medication that costs 5 times as much, but we don't carry that. Even though it's better, we don't carry that because we're trying to keep our costs down. Now, when we can negotiate it with the American pharmaceutical companies to bring the price down, then you'll have it. Come back in 5 years and you can have it, but not now. Right? That's how they do that, and that's called rationing, right? So healthcare is rationed in most of these centralized systems. So they're able to control cost by reducing access, and to some degree, depending on how you define quality, by reducing quality, right? So if quality to you is there's pharmaceutical A that's been around for 30 years, that's relatively inexpensive because it's gone off patent, and pharmaceutical B that just got developed 2 years ago and is on patent, right? But costs 5 times as much, but it's better, right? It's better than pharmaceutical A for treating your illness. The centralized systems will typically say you cannot have B. You're going to use the cheaper solution. Let me give you an immediate example of that. 10 years ago or so, 2 companies developed cures for hepatitis C. Hepatitis C is a viral disease. You get it much like you might get HIV, typically through sexual contact or intravenous exchange of intravenous drug use. So if you're a heroin addict and you're shooting up in an alleyway with 3 of your best friends that you met half an hour ago, and you're sharing the needle, right? And one of them has hepatitis C. Congratulations, you now have hepatitis C. Hepatitis is an irritation of the liver, right? Hepatitis that refers to the liver, and itis is a irritation. And so hepatitis C attacks your liver, right? and it will kill you. It is a terminal illness. Now, it used to be that you would just die, right? Back in the day, you would just die. We eventually developed treatments for hepatitis C that turned it from a immediately terminal illness to a chronic condition, which meant you had to take medicine for the rest of your life, right, to control it. Well, about 10 years ago, and that was the case for a long time, right, decades. Well, about 10 years ago, I think around 2012, a couple of companies had real breakthroughs, and they figured out a cure for hepatitis C, right? So you take this round of medication for it's a couple of months treatment. It's pretty nasty stuff. You don't want to take it if you don't have to take it. But at the end of it, there would be no more hepatitis C in your body. You'd be cured of hepatitis C. So you don't have to take medication for the rest of your life. You get through this thing and you're done, right? A round of I can't remember the name. It's a funny, these pharmaceuticals have these crazy names. So a round of this hepatitis C treatment initially was about $95,000. $95,000. Now, based on the mode of transmission that I just described to you, who do you think is what groups of people do you think are particularly plagued by hepatitis C in the United States? Not very wealthy. Yes. This. They'd never be able to afford it, right? So people don't have access to insurance. Yes. So poor people, right? So what am I saying? You get hepatitis C through sexual contact and IV drug use. So it's prostitutes, drug users, right? It's people who, as you guys said, are living at the margins, right? So no, they can't afford that money. What population also has a high prevalence of hepatitis C? Prisoners. People who are living in prison have a high degree of hepatitis C. Why do they have a high degree of hepatitis C? Intravenous drug use. There's a huge amount of intravenous drug use in our prison system. And so they're sharing, cooking their heroin and then sharing the needles because it's hard to get the needles into the prison to begin with. And so a lot of that going on. So the places that we see real outbreaks of hepatitis C, yes, everybody's at risk. I'm not saying that if you're wealthy and educated that you can't possibly get hepatitis C. But the probability, if you look at a population level of what subpopulations are most plagued by hepatitis C, it's your low income, right? It's your low income populations, particularly populations that are involved in all kinds of other negative behaviors. And so these are people who can't just go to their, Cigna plan and be like, hey, Cigna, pay for my, $95,000 round of treatment. And honestly, Cigna will do that, right? If you or Cigna or Blue Cross or whatever it is you guys have for health insurance, will pay for that because it's cheaper to cure you of hepatitis in the long run for a Cigna and not have to pay for the chronic care forever than it is to just pay for your 3 months course of treatment. But if you're a super poor person who doesn't have health insurance, who's a prisoner, for example, now we have to make a decision as a society, right? I've locked you up. What's your name? Leela? Alila. So Alila's held up a bank, as she is wont to do, and is now in prison. And she, is so depressed that she starts, shooting up heroin because she's going to be there for 25 years for armed robbery. And within a few months, she's got hepatitis C. So do we treat her with, off-patent treatment that's been, around for 30 years that costs $100 a month? Or do we pay $95,000 for a bank robber, right? A violent criminal to get this treatment? Because, oh, by the way, if we spend $95,000 on Alila, right, that's money taken out of the system that could be used to provide care for a whole bunch of, poor children, for example, right? We could be doing all kinds of well baby checks like a year's worth of well baby checks up at Goodwin federally qualified health clinic, right? A clinic that's designed for poor people. With 95, they could do a lot of good for $95,000. So should we just let Alila rot? You know, and we're not going to not take care of her. We're going to give her the $100 treatment, and she's going to have Hep C for the rest of her life, along with all the complications that come with a chronic disease like that. Should we say, you're a criminal, you're out of luck, you get the $100 treatment, and then take the $95,000 and put it over with the children, the babies, right? They love the babies, going to take care of the babies, looking at all the ladies, going to love the babies, right? We're going to take care of the babies, or we're going to take care of this hardened criminal over here, right? And that's a real question. And that's a question that the way that the United States answers it is, which one should we take care of? And we say, yes, right? Which means we take care of both. But what does that do? That drives up cost. If you're in a centrally driven system like that, what's the answer? The babies get the money. The babies get the money. Alila gets the $100 treatment. Right. So that's part of what makes this difficult. And so this is the challenge, right, that we face as in our healthcare system as health planners, right? And it is driving these issues all the time. So, and there are ways. Sorry, you're in the back. You gave that great answer about EDs. What's your name? Brian? So Brian gave this great answer about, well, you reduce quality, you get lower licensed people. How many of you guys have friends or relatives that are nurses that have been doing nursing for a long time? Okay. When you get sick, do you ever turn to that person and ask them for advice? But they're not a physician. They're not allowed to practice medicine. You've just asked them to commit a crime. I'm embarrassed about all you guys. How could you make your friend commit a crime? They're practicing medicine without a license. They're going to be in jail with Alila here pretty soon, right? What you've done, seriously, and I make no joke here, what you have done is committed a crime. Your friend, if they gave you advice, has committed a crime. They're practicing medicine without a license. They're not an MD. They're not an independent practice nurse practitioner or independent practice physician assistant. They're an RN. They're not allowed to give out advice except under the supervision of a physician. They are allowed to give out advice, but they have to do it under the supervision of a physician or other provider who has a license to practice medicine. Otherwise, they are practicing without a license. Now, the question is, why shouldn't your friend be able to give out advice? Right? Well, why not? No answer? Let you out of jail for a minute.
I was going to say, aren't they allowed to say, like, I can't give you medical advice from what I've seen?
Yeah. Well, now you're tap dancing around the law, right? Yeah. Right. I can talk generally about medicine, right? But you didn't call your friend for like a general discussion of medical treatment. You're like, I have this and I need help, right? And so, you're being very specific. So yeah, when a physician, what they're really trying to do is avoid giving advice because if a physician gives you advice on over Instagram, right? They are also committing malpractice. They are licensed to practice, but they haven't examined you, right? All they've got is, you maybe ask them a question, you guys type in a one sentence thing. If they haven't actually laid eyes on you some way, then you could sue them for malpractice, because you could turn around and be like, well, you said to do this and I got hurt. Now I'm going to sue you, right? So they always, if they talk like that, they always couch it with, well, you're not my patient, and but in general, these symptoms indicate this. This is how the algorithm I would run down if you showed up in my clinic, right? So coming back to the question though, why not have an RN with lots of experience be able to give out advice and get paid for it? How many of you guys have glasses? I see a couple of glasses, but I suspect many of you are wearing contacts and hiding the fact that you wear glasses, right? Or need glasses. So when you go to your optometrist, who does, you see an optician typically first, right? They do the technician helps you, does the exam, does the measurements, and then the optometrist does the kind of final tweaking, right? But you know what? The optician could probably do it. Can't, let me tell you, can do that. An optician training, at least in the Army, was like a year. So civilians probably a little more than a year. And so why can't an optician set up? I went so long between eye exam, like real eye exams. I think I went like close to 20 years between real eye exams. So I like came out of the Stone Age. And when I did my retirement physical, they're like, all right, look in this box. And you guys probably done that, or you look in the, like, look at the tree on the hill in the background. I'm like, all right, well, here's your prescription. What? Where's all the little like clicking the things and no, you get your prescription. So why can't an optician, that's who's doing that, running that little machine, why couldn't an optician just hang out a shingle, Bob the optician, come here and get glasses, wicked cheap? Yeah, what do you think, Brian? Sorry? Probably give you the, no, I don't think they are. 99% of the time, they're not going to give you the wrong prescription because they're the ones doing the prescription to begin with, right? Well, they're not, right? So they're that's the present reality of the world, is they are not allowed to do that. So my question is, why not? Well, that's terrible, but okay. So much for Good Samaritan, right? There are Good Samaritan laws that would protect you if you did do care on somebody in an emergency situation. You just don't want to start giving them medical advice, So in the United States, we limit who can provide medical care, right? Even if they could provide some care. Now, an RN would not, let's say we allowed your friend, the RN, to hang out a shingle and be, Joni the RN, right? Come see me for simple medical advice. As long as, she could hang out a shingle, she could charge you, say, $30, $40 per visit, right? She could make a pretty good living at that rate. So we say, no, you can't do that. In other countries, that's not the case, right? So in a lot of other countries, France, for example, if you've got the sniffles or a cough or something like that, you can go to the CVS, the pharmacy, talk to the pharmacist, and the pharmacist can write you a prescription and be like, here, take these drugs, come back, and if it doesn't get cured, come back tomorrow. Cannot do that in the United States. You have to go to a doctor who writes a prescription that goes to the pharmacist. The pharmacist can fill the prescription. The pharmacist can't independently engage in medical practice. That's illegal, right? That's practicing without a license again. In France, which is generally speaking, a pretty modern country, right? It's, if you got hurt and went boom, would you be scared if you were in Paris? No, I mean, you wouldn't want to go boom, but right. But like, you wouldn't be like, if you were in some developing country, I don't want to pick on anybody, but France, pretty advanced country, right? Pretty confident in their medical system. So there are differences. And so this is an example where the pharmacist is not a doctor, right? So the doctor is the peak, right? That's our, and better than that, not any doctor, but a specialist, right? So if every time my knee hurt, I went to an orthopedic surgeon specialized in knee surgery, right? I'd be going to the peak of the peak of the peak quality wise. If I only went to Mass General every time I got hurt, right? And went to see the director of orthopedic surgery, and that was all that was good enough for me. Well, I'm getting the highest possible quality, but I'm spending a boatload of money on that care, right? And is it really necessary to go to see an orthopedic surgeon, knee specialist every time my knee hurts a little bit? I'll tell you no. I'm a 52-year-old man. My knee hurts all the time, right? So you're almost always seeking out a lower quality care than you possibly could, right? When you go to see your family medicine doctor, that's a lower level of care than you possibly could pursue, but 99% of the time, it's perfectly fine, right? It's more than enough. Frankly, my primary care provider is a nurse practitioner, fabulous lady, right? Got her training here, actually, at UNH. She's a UNH grad. And I'm setting aside my blood stuff that I told you about the other day, I'm a relatively healthy guy. Now, I could stand to lose some weight, working on that. But otherwise, I'm at 52, I'm doing okay, right? So otherwise healthy, nurse practitioner is more than enough to take care of my ills. And when she identifies something that, when I bring something to her attention, like knee's been hurting for a long time, she's like, take 800 milligrams of Motrin 3 times a day for 3 months, then come back and see me. I do that. It still hurts. Then she's like, all right, now it's time to go to the orthopedic surgeon, right? That's an example of a lower quality care that costs a lot less. We talked about orthopedic surgeon, right? Hand surgeon, for example. So if I hurt my hand, I could see my nurse practitioner and she'd tell me to take Motrin, or I could go to see the hand surgeon. Most likely he'll tell me to take Motrin. The difference will be going to see the hand surgeon will cost me $500. Going to see the nurse practitioner will cost me $75, or maybe not me, but the system, right? My insurance will wind up paying $500 for a visit to the hand surgeon. So there are a lot of decisions that we make in our health system, across the board health systems, right? Different health systems make different kind of allocations. And we make decisions about quality all the time. So most of the time you'd be okay, probably going to see an optician rather than optometrist to get your eyes done, right? Because the optician's doing most of the work anyway. Now, what can an optometrist do? Well, an optometrist has training to look in your eye and can tell if you have early stage diabetes, for example, which is pretty cool, right? And would be really good to know as early as possible, because diabetes is a devastating chronic illness if you don't take care of it. So there are benefits to that, but they are not, without cost. So that's an interesting challenge. So we have this iron triangle of care, right? And so, so my nurse practitioner, right, who can deal with me 99% of the time. How long does it take to get to be a nurse practitioner? Anybody know what the training is? Ish. Take a stab. Close. It's a master's degree, so it's 6 years. A 4-year undergrad, 2-year master's, right? 6 years, 15 years. Which one's cheaper, right? The 6, right? In terms of the sacrifice that you're going to make, you're going to go all the way through, you're going to go all the way through medical school, 5-year residency, 2-year fellowship. You're going to have, it's not really an option. You have to charge more money because you're 33 and just getting started. But if you want to be a nurse practitioner, you could be a nurse practitioner at 24, 25 years old. Okay. All right, so that's a big issue. So when we talk about, another thing I want to highlight here, run low on time. Another thing I want to focus on about is this. I want you to think about for a minute that coronavirus should be slowing down. Everybody I'm talking to, I had a meeting with the hospital, a bunch of hospital CEOs the other day, or I was in a meeting with a bunch of hospital CEOs the other day, and they're all basically like, we think this is going to be over by around spring break. We think it's going to fall. Right now they're dying, but they think it's going to fall off probably by mid to late March. So we're going on spring break, right? Now, I want you to think about your ideal spring break. Put it in your head for a second. What would you do on spring break? What would be a great spring break after a couple of years of not really being able to travel or do cool stuff? And I want you to put that in your head for a second. Now, I want you to imagine that you're going to go on spring break with 3 of your best buddies, because that's pretty common, right? We go on spring break with a few of our buddies. So let's say 3 of your best buddies. And you're like, all right, we're going to sit down and talk about going on spring break, 4 of us together. We're going to make a plan. Now, are you immediately going to come to consensus on where to go and what to do? Maybe, maybe not. It's going to be some discussion, right? Because everybody's got slightly different preferences. Everybody's got a different sense of what a quality spring break would be. Everybody's got a different, has got different cost parameters. Let's assume we all have about the same amount of access, meaning we're all going to go on spring break, right? But we're now thinking about it. We got 4 of you. So that's going to take some time to kind of negotiate out because everybody's got different parameters. But we can do that pretty easily. I want you to double that to 10. Or, that's more than double, but let's bump it up to 10. Now there's 10 of you making that decision. Is that harder or easier to make that decision? Because you're all going to go together. There's no going on spring break unless all 10 of you go together. So you've got to come to consensus on where you're going. So is that harder to do with 10 people versus 4 people, or easier, or about the same? Harder. Probably getting to be quite a bit harder, because some of these people, by the time you go out to 10, you probably don't know them as well, don't know all their. Now, let's bump it up to us as a class. We're going to go on spring break together, all of us, right? And we got to negotiate a decision about where we're going, what we're going to do, what we're going to spend, how much we're willing to spend. That's now becoming a lot harder, right? Let's assume we have to get, and we could assume, so there's all these different kinds of voting rules, but let's assume that we have to get a super majority. So like 60% have to agree, 66%, let's say 2/3 have to agree. So we can still kind of vote 1/3 down, right? So Alina wants to go do something, the rest of us want to go, so we can vote her down, right? But that becomes pretty complicated pretty quick. So I want you to think about this. In rank order of population, where does the United States fall in countries in the world in terms of population, in terms of size? Who's the biggest population in the world? First, let me ask that. China, right? Who's the second biggest population in the world? India, good. Where does the United States fall? It's third. We're the 3rd largest country in the world. Now, there's a pretty dramatic drop off from India to the United States, right? So the United States, we've got about 330 million people, right? So we fall off. China and India are within a stone's throw of each other. Then we fall down to the United States. That's about 330 million, right? Then the next largest country is Indonesia. We got Pakistan, Brazil, Nigeria, Bangladesh, Russia, Mexico, Japan. So in the top 10 countries, the only country that qualifies as a developed country is the United States. Right? To get to the next developed country, you got to go all the way down to 11, right, which is Japan, and they're roughly 1/3 the size of the United States. Right? Now, our book is a big fan of the National Health Service, which is Great Britain. We got to go way down to number 22 to get to Great Britain at 66 million people. So the United States is roughly 5 times the size population of Great Britain. So when we're trying to make a decision as a country, right, think about my little spring break example. When I take, let's say we took our little group of 4 people and we had to come up with a solution that everybody agreed to. Now amp that up to 20 people. The challenge is not linear in my mind, right? Meaning a straight line, like it's just progressively linear, like it progresses in a straight line. In my mind, as you add more people, that's an exponential growth. So it curves up and faster. Like the more people you add, the harder it gets, faster and faster and faster. So anytime the United States has to pass a national policy that will be agreeable to everybody in the country, you should bear in mind that we're the third largest country in the world, first of all. And when you have people who are talking about, gosh, shouldn't we be more like Sweden, right? Well, Sweden has the population of Massachusetts, right? Which is hard enough to get the people from Massachusetts to get along and be nice to each other. Never mind, right? Now take that up to 300, 33 times as large a population to make a policy decision. So there's a reason why policymaking in the United States is as complicated as it is. It's because we're an enormous country, right? Relatively speaking. So when you hear people talk about we should do this, that Sweden does, or that, or that, say, Israel does, or Switzerland, bear in mind the significant difference in size of country and the complexity of making that work. Now, the miracle of the United States is not that we are as dysfunctional as we are, but that we aren't all killing each other, right? Because the problem that the United States solved relatively early on, however imperfectly, was to get a very mixed population of peoples to be able to live together and not kill each other. Now, you go to Sweden, everybody's tall, blonde, and beautiful, right? For the most part, because they're all are related, right? They're all Swedes. You walk down the street, you're going to recognize a Swede, right? And the same in Japan, even, or a lot of these other countries. So when you have a very homogeneous population, it's easier to make decisions. When you have a heterogeneous population, a mixed population like the United States, the miracle of the United States is that we function at all, right? And that we function as well as we do. And we shouldn't bemoan that fact. We should instead say, it's pretty darn amazing. All right. So I want to hit another major issue that before we break, that'll really kind of cover the important material. That is, our book uses the quad model, which I do like. I don't really have argument with it. All right. So the quad model breaks down healthcare into four parts. The healthcare system into four parts. The first part is financing. Actually, let's say the first part is the patient, as it should be. Your book doesn't draw it quite like this. Your first main main consideration should be the person who's getting care. Right? Now the question is, where does the person get the money to provide the care? So financing, the first stage of the quad model is financing. Financing, the question is, where does the money come from to pay for the healthcare and health insurance? And those two things are not the same. So where does the money come from that we provide the care and the risk shifting from for the individual? Well, the answer is some of it is going to come from the individual, always, even in a national health service system. Some of it is going to come from the government. That's GOVT, I kind of mushed in there. So the government is going to contribute some of it, and that's true in the United States. Some of it is going to come from employers. Right? So if you're like me, you're employed in the private sector, you're going to probably get, in the United States, most likely you're going to get your health insurance through your employer. So most in health insurance is employer-based. That's what it's called, employer-based. So I pay UNH a certain amount of money, right? And then UNH takes my money. So I put my money in, right? And then UNH contributes a whole bunch of money, a lot more than I do. And we cover the cost of my healthcare. Now, in reality, the government is also kicking in some money, even for me. Well, I'm a unique case because I'm also a military health system beneficiary, but setting that aside, like if I was a generic professor who's not retired military, the government still subsidizes the healthcare system, both directly and indirectly, by sending payments to healthcare providers, by supporting medical schools and other things. We'll talk more about that later. So these three sources are providing the resources that are used to pay for the care, right? Now, the individual is paying taxes to the government, and employers are paying taxes to the government. So the system is complicated, right? It gets complicated. The key I want you to remember is, what's the financing stage about? It's where the resources for the care come from. Now, in the United States, it's a mishmash of stuff, right? Now, if you're retired and you're on Medicare, then it's really this. It's you and the government paying. But if you're employed in the United States, most likely, and you have employer-based insurance, then it's probably the combination of these three, okay? Now, you have the provider of care. So that's your hospital, your doctor, right? Your nursing home, your pharmacy, whatever is providing you that healthcare, your nutritionist counseling, your OT therapy. That's your provider. The provider is delivering care to the individual. Right? Now, the provider does not do this for free. The provider expects a payment. So we have 1, 2, 3 sections of the quad model, okay? We have the financing, we have the provider providing care, and then we have this system of payment. And the system of payment varies from model to model. Somehow the provider is getting paid. We refer to this as reimbursement. Right? Now, some of the financing will be direct. In fact, you could kind of say the patient can provide direct payment to the provider, but I'm pooling all of the costs into all of the resources into the financing to say that the payment gets to. So it goes from the resource pool to the payment, right? So when you go to see your provider, a lot of times you'll have a copay, right? When you go in, they'll be like, okay, that's $20 today. We'll build your insurance for the rest of the money. We'll talk more about that later. So there's a piece of it coming directly from you. There's a piece of it coming from your insurer. So you pay your insurance company for your plan, right? And then some of the payment comes from you when you get like your copay or, and then some of it comes from your insurer So it's a mix. Some of it is direct from you to the provider. Some of it is you provide money to your insurer, right? Some of those resources flow out of your financing pool to the insurer, who then makes payment to the provider. So the basic quad model is resources are piled up in that financing bubble, right? And they come from multiple points depending on the kind of system, and relatively speaking, more or less. So if you're in the British healthcare system, the very little comes from your employer, except in the form of taxes to the government. Very little comes from you, except that you're paying taxes to the government. The vast majority of the resources come from the government. So it's funneled, all the resources, the money is funneled through the government to finance healthcare. It's still not free, right? Then you have an insurance, and then you have an insurance function and then payment. All right. So I want to talk 5 minutes. All right. Talk for a minute. So we've kind of talked about the government, right? So financing, right? Government raises money through taxes. And then they provide insurance or integrated care, depending on the kind of system you're in. So examples of insurance that the government actually pays when we're unified here: Medicare, Medicaid. You have TRICARE. So if you're a military service member, you could get TRICARE. Then the VA, and then we'll get into integrated systems later. Then you have the employers, right? Subsidized through your payroll. So if you qualify for healthcare insurance through your provider, through your employer is paying a large sum of money to an insurance company. You're contributing some of it. So for example, I have a plan where I pay for I have a plan through UNH that pays for me and my two of my younger children. That cost me $200 roughly per pay period. So I pay something like $5,000 a year, $4,000 a year in total for my healthcare. My UNH matches $17,000 to that. So I pay $4,000, UNH pays $17,000, right? If I was not getting that health insurance through UNH, they would be willing to pay me $17,000 because UNH doesn't really care one way or the other. They just want to keep me. So one option would be they could just give me the $17,000. They don't. There's some reasons for that. We'll get into it. I'm out of time. All right. You'll read more about these details. I may cover a couple more things next week. I will talk to you on Tuesday. So you have homeworks due this weekend. That's it.